standing at the altar, looking into the eyes of the person you love most in the world, only to discover years later that the man promising to protect you had already taken someone's life. And worse, he was planning to do it again. This is the chilling true story of a woman who unknowingly married a murderer. In 1990s America, Susan believed she had found the perfect man. His name was Richard. He was charming, confident, and seemed almost too good to be true. They met through mutual friends, and from the beginning, Richard knew exactly how to make people trust him. He was the kind of man who remembered birthdays, opened doors, and always had the right thing to say. To Susan, he felt safe. For years, their relationship looked like something out of a movie. Friends admired them. Neighbors envied them. And when Richard proposed, Susan never hesitated. She said yes. What she didn't know was that Richard had carefully constructed a life built on lies. Because before Susan ever met him, another woman had vanished under mysterious circumstances. And Richard was connected to it. But nobody knew. At least not yet. The marriage started normally. They bought a house, planned vacations, talked about having children. But after a few years, Susan noticed something strange. Richard would become furious over the smallest things. A misplaced receipt, a late phone call, a disagreement about money. His personality seemed to switch without warning. One moment, he was loving. The next, he was cold and frightening. Whenever Susan questioned him, he always had an explanation. Stress from work, lack of sleep, financial pressure. And somehow she always believed him. Until one night. It was nearly midnight when Susan woke up and realized Richard wasn't in bed. She found him sitting alone in the garage, in total darkness, staring at nothing. When she asked what he was doing, he jumped as if he'd been caught doing something wrong. Then he laughed, a strange, nervous laugh, and told her he couldn't sleep. The explanation felt odd, but Susan let it go. What she didn't know was that Richard was hiding secrets that were beginning to catch up with him. Months later, a detective knocked on their front door. At first, Susan assumed it was a mistake. But the detective wasn't there by accident. He wanted to ask Richard questions about a woman who had disappeared years earlier. A woman named Melissa. Susan had never heard that name before. When she looked at her husband, she expected confusion. Instead, she saw fear. Real fear. For just a second. Then it disappeared. Richard quickly smiled and claimed it was all a misunderstanding. An old acquaintance. Nothing more. The detective left. But Susan couldn't forget the look she had seen on her husband's face. Curiosity turned into suspicion. Suspicion turned into obsession. And Susan began digging into Richard's past. What she discovered terrified her. The stories Richard had told her about his childhood didn't match official records. His employment history contained gaps he couldn't explain. Even some of his former relationships seemed to end under strange circumstances. Then she found something even worse. A box hidden in the basement. Locked. Hidden behind old storage containers. Inside were newspaper clippings. Dozens of them. Most were about missing women. And among them was an article about Melissa, the woman the detective had mentioned. Susan's hands began to shake. Why would her husband keep newspaper articles about a missing woman? Unless he knew more than he was saying. As investigators continued reopening the cold case, new evidence emerged. Witnesses came forward. Old statements were re-examined. And slowly, a horrifying picture started to form. Melissa had last been seen with Richard. He had lied about key details of that night. And forensic evidence that had once been overlooked suddenly became important. The walls were closing in. Richard knew it. And that's when things became truly dangerous. One evening, Susan returned home to find her husband sitting quietly at the kitchen table. No television. No music. Just silence. He asked her a simple question. Have you been talking to the police? The way he asked it made her blood run cold. Not angry. Not curious. Threatening. For the first time in their marriage, Susan felt genuinely afraid. She lied and said no. But Richard kept staring, as if he already knew the truth. That night, Susan barely slept. And before sunrise, she made a decision that may have saved her life. She left. Without warning. Without telling him. She packed essentials and drove away. Days later, investigators arrested Richard. The evidence against him had become overwhelming. During questioning, detectives uncovered years of deception. The man Susan thought she knew never really existed. The charming husband, the caring partner, the trustworthy friend. It had all been a mask. Behind it was a manipulative predator who had spent years hiding in plain sight. Eventually, Richard was convicted for the murder connected to Melissa's disappearance. The case shocked the nation. But for Susan, the conviction brought little comfort, because she couldn't stop asking herself one question. How do you share a bed with someone, laugh with them, build a future with them, and never realize they're capable of murder? Today, criminal psychologists often point to cases like this as a reminder that some killers don't look dangerous. They don't hide in dark alleys. They don't fit the image people expect. Sometimes they wear suits, smile in photographs, attend family dinners, and convince everyone around them that they're ordinary, including the people who love them most. For Susan, the greatest shock wasn't learning she had married a murderer. It was realizing how close she may have come to becoming his next victim. And that is what makes this story truly terrifying. Because evil doesn't always arrive looking like a monster. Sometimes, it arrives with a wedding ring.